Before we talk about what a Quipu is, we need to understand what a writing system is. Personally, I love writing systems, and from a young age, I collected alphabets before I knew that other systems existed. And that's how my interest in linguistics started. So you've got European languages, English, Spanish, French, Italian, etc. They're all written with the same script. Even when you get into Russian and the Cyrillic alphabet, it's not too different yet. But there are other scripts out there. Hebrew, Chinese, Japanese uses Chinese characters and two different syllabaries. Going back in time, you've got Sumerian and Egyptian hieroglyphics. They look different, but all of these scripts or writing systems have something in common. They're all written, as are the Mayan hieroglyphics in the Americas. But in South America, things get interesting. They wrote in chords. Quipus are chord records commonly associated with the Incas. When the Spanish conquered the Inca Empire, they wrote about the use of quipus. And the way they talked about them, it sounded like they were pretty much on par with Spanish writing. So, how do you read them? What are the letters? What has meaning? The color, the way the chords are twisted, the way they attach to the main chord, and even the type of fiber used has been shown to be important, which we'll go in much more detail of all of those features later in this video series. It's like if you wrote hello on paper and they have a different meaning when sent in a text, or if you change the color of the letters, it would change the meaning of the word. It doesn't mean hello anymore, it means something else. Quipus are just more complicated than other writing systems. The purpose of this video series is to cover the basics of what we know about the quipus to make them more approachable. So, what is a quipu? The Quechua word quipu means knot. In Spanish, it is written with a Q. However, in a newer writing convention that is more accurate to Quechua pronunciation, it's written with a K. They're the same thing, just spelled differently. So who used quipus? When the Spanish conquistadores went to South America, they wrote about quipus being used by the Inca people, but that's not where quipus began. The quipu tradition started with the Wari around 600 to 1000 AD. They were different from quipus used later by the Inca Empire, which is something I plan to discuss in a much later video. The Inca Empire lasted from about 1400 to 1532 with the arrival of the Spanish. There was an artifact very similar to a quipu found in Caral, which dates back to about 3,000 years before the Wari. It's often called a proto-quipu, and it's quite different from the Wari and Inca quipus. It's not typically considered to be a direct predecessor, so I won't be covering it in this video series. Quipucamayocs were trained in Cusco on how to tie the cords. Back home, in the local villages, the Quipucamayocs would make a quipu and send it to the capital at Cusco. Through a network of runners called chasquis, the transport of quipus was similar to a relay race, except passing a bundle of cords instead of a baton. The quipus were used for collecting census records, recording tribute. The Incas didn't collect money like the Spanish Empire had coins. Rather, the Inca rulers collected goods, food, and labor directly. Able-bodied young men were organized into work groups, and these groups would build roads and buildings, walls, big structures. This was all organized through quipus. It's also recorded that they contained histories, astrology, laws, all sorts of things during the Inca Empire. And then as time went on during the colonial empire, they were adjusted to record things like confessions for parishioners to take to the church. And they could keep track of their sins and then confess those to the priest. So they do seem to be quite versatile. And they're still in use today. There are two main types of quipus that are used today. They're called patrimonial and ethnographic, and we'll be getting into some specific examples later in the video series. But basically, patrimonial quipus are historical quipus that are still used in the modern era, even though the current owners can't read them. Notable examples are the Tupicocha and the Rapaz quipus. So, especially the Tupicocha quipus, they look more like a colonial era quipu. And then ethnographic quipus are much smaller. There are different examples. For example, in 1935, the village of Antucayo was still using quipus to record services provided by different families in the village and to determine debts owed every year. In the communities of Cusco and Marga, Peru, funerary quipus are a single long cord that is wrapped around a person for their burial. Knots in the cord indicate how many times the Ave Maria and the Lord's Prayer should be repeated before burial. And mountain herders in Bolivia use them to record numbers related to their herds. So ethnographic quipus have recognizable knots. At least they're recognizable to the owners. People know exactly what they mean. People are still writing on them. And just the form is quite different from the quipus that were used during the Inca era, which is something we'll be covering also in a bit later video. And quipus have not escaped the digital age. In recent years, information about the quipus has been recorded in the Open Quipu Repository, the OKR, which is a SQLite database. One of the difficult things about quipus is that we don't know exactly what features are meaningful, so the database records many features, including the type of fiber used, how many knots, what direction knots are tied, and even how thick the cords are, with the idea being that until we can rule out certain things having meaning, we should record observations about as many features as possible. Can they be considered a form of writing? In order to answer this question, we have to decide what constitutes writing. In most of the world, writing is a way of putting speech into a character pictographic representation. In English, there's an alphabet, and each letter should reflect how letters in that word are pronounced. So it's going from speech to paper. Quipus are often called semasiographic, so things like numbers and musical notation, they don't represent specific words, but rather ideas. So you can see 1 + 1 = 2 in English, and someone can read it in Spanish. 1 + 1 son 2. Japanese, probably something like 1と1は2です. With the idea being that these symbols represent thoughts and have meaning direct, more direct than if you were to write the words. There is a set of quipus found in Coziata, written about by Sabine Hyland, that they represent syllables. So that definitely is a writing system. However, when you look at the Inca style quipus, it's not so clear cut. It seems like the Inca style quipus, the more traditional quipus, they have knots to represent numbers and they have colors to represent categories, which we'll get into how that is used much later. But for the purpose of this video series, I'm considering quipus not as a single writing system, but rather a media, much like pen and paper. So these are textile cords that were used sometimes as a writing system, sometimes, as the semiasographic, I can't say that word, and sometimes even for drawing. They're very versatile. Another complication with the quipus is that some do seem to be more of a mnemonic device, like the single quipu that has the knots to represent Ave Maria and the Lord's Prayer. If someone who didn't have that context looked at this one chord with some knots, there's not really a way to read it. But with the Inca style quipus, the quipus that were used during the Inca Empire, they were recorded in one place, bundled, and sent by a series of runners called chasquis to the capital at Cusco. So the person who was tying the knots, the Quipucamayoc, in the local village, was not present to explain to the Inca king, right, that what the chords meant. So I do think there's hope for at least those kinds of quipus being, that we should be able to read them, even if we don't have someone to explain exactly what the colors and the knots mean. They seem to be standardized enough that we can get something from them, and which is really exciting. There's been a lot of very interesting developments in just the past 10-20 years in the field of Quipu research that gives a lot of hope. My dream is that one day we'll be to a point where there'll be an archaeological excavation, and quipus will be found with a person, and we'll be able to use the quipu to tell the rank of the person and maybe their name or their family history or their role in whatever empire they belong to, and use the quipu as like a primary source, much like nowadays in Egypt when they excavate, you can look at the hieroglyphics and we can read those and say, oh, this is the name of the person and this is their function, this is a little of their history. I dream that one day we'll be able to do that with quipus as well. This video series is designed to be kind of a beginner's introduction to the field of quipu research. I'll have some videos about how to make your own quipu using the quipu as a medium to express things in your native language. And this will require some creativity because we don't know enough about how words were expressed in quipus to be able to do this accurately, but we'll use the quipu as a medium and also go over some of the basic research and basic principles of quipu construction, what the symbols mean, how to write numbers with the knots, and basically the current state of our knowledge about the quipus right now. Please click subscribe to join me in this journey of discovery about one of the most, if not the most, unique form of writing in human history. And if you want to know more about this, if you want to know more about this subject in greater depth, I did write a book that's set up to be cover the basics, but in a way that helps the reader feel like it is their discovery. So instead of just, the YouTube series is going to cover very basically, this is the research, this is what we know, but the book is designed more in the sense of being a workbook. Here is a quipu example. What can you glean from this example? And giving the reader a chance to kind of tease out this information on their own before explaining what quipu researchers have found using these quipu examples. There's a link in the description below. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in future videos.